On behalf of Compassionate Brattleboro, I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out in the rain. At 5 minutes to 7, there were 4 or 5 people here, and I thought, uh-oh, this could be a very small group. And then everybody poured in. So thank you so much. I'm excited about the conversation we're about to have. And grateful to everybody for coming out, to the staff here at the library for hosting us, for Maria, who is filming us for Brattleboro Public TV. Thank you, Maria. I have, and of course, for our panelists, thank you all for showing up and preparing to share your perspective with us tonight. I have an apology to make. I overlooked a group of people who should be represented here tonight. I didn't realize until yesterday when I received a phone call from someone in the community who asked if there was anyone on the panel who is skeptical about the existence of climate change. And I completely overlooked that group, that faction in our community, and I tried reaching her today with the hope that she could be here and participate in the panel, but I wasn't able to get through. So I just want to acknowledge that there are people in the community who do have skepticism around the existence of climate change, and I sorely regret that there isn't someone here to represent that group tonight. So I hope that anybody, everyone here reaches out and engages in compassionate communication with folks who do hold that position. And if there's anybody here tonight who feels that way, I would love to make room for you in the panel. Or if the woman who called is here. Okay. So, yes?
Suggestion for the panelists themselves. Everybody here is obviously wants to everybody wants to contain climate change, but you also know the reasons that the people who are for climate change, the opposition, your opposition, you know what they say. So when you make your presentation, you can also introduce what the other side says, as well as what you say, and come down on your side, because you've analyzed both sides. So you can do that, and that makes your argument stronger.
Thank you. So tonight's program will have 2 parts. One is where our panelists will speak, and they will each have about 10 minutes. And I have trouble interrupting people when they're saying things that are really interesting. So what I'll be doing is just handing you a gadget, and it's just lets you know that you have 2 minutes to wrap things up. And then I'll pick it up from you when you're done, okay? After that, we'll have an opportunity to practice compassionate listening. We'll group into 3s, and last time people found their own groups, and this time, for time purposes, I'm just going to do the old school teacher thing and do a 1, 2, 3, just so we can group right up and not spend a lot of time moving around or waiting in that awkward who's going to be my partner thing. So, and we'll have about a half hour to practice compassionate listening, being curious with each other, and just reflecting back the key issues that you heard said. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Mike Auerbach, and Mike is a science teacher, environmental science and biology teacher at BUHS, and he'll be speaking on behalf of educators here in Brattleboro. And this is Lisa Schneckenberger? Yes. Lisa is a parent, and she is also a performing artist. And then we have Django Grace. Django is a student at BUHS. Oh, I'm sorry, at Hilltop. Oh, okay, at Hilltop. And then we have Abby Mnookin, and Abby works for Vermont 350 Vermont, and here in Brattleboro that shows up in a group called Mother Up. And so she is speaking as an organizer here in this community, and we have Dave Cohen, who is a mental health worker here in Brattleboro. So thank you all so much for coming, and we're all very excited to hear what you have to say. There are key questions here, and I believe everybody has a copy of them. I will read them to you very quickly so that you know what the key questions are that focus our conversation. Question number 1 is, climate change is putting many people in the world under stress, physically, culturally, and emotionally. As we go through this, what are the opportunities to grow in our compassion, and what are the challenges these changes will put on our compassion? Number 2, Brattleboro is one small part of the world. As we seek to be more compassionate, what can we as a community do to be compassionate, responsible citizens of the world? 3, are our current considerations of climate change improperly human-centric? If so, how does this appear in our thoughts and conversations? What is the value of expanding compassion to other animals and life forms and to global evolution? Number 4 is, our current political landscape poses challenges to establishing consensus policies on global warming. How does loving our enemies, quote unquote, and living the principles of compassion shape our political debate? And finally, at what point does our concern for the environment overwhelm our hope? And how does compassion for ourselves and those suffering despair work? When is it more important than compassion for others? So I've asked each panelist to choose 1 or 2 questions to address, and they will begin by sharing with you what question they chose.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I am going to speak to question number 2. Brattleboro is one small part of the world. As we seek to be more compassionate, what can we as a community do to be compassionate, responsible citizens of the world? I think I will scatter through a couple of other ones while I'm doing it. Is this okay? Can everybody hear me? Great. Thank you. Anyway, as you heard, my name is Mike. I teach biology and environmental science at Brattleboro Union High School, where I am in my 19th year. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read something that I prepared. Thank you. And thank you, Jess and Compassion Brattleboro, for putting this together. And I also want to thank us, and not just the panel, but all of us, for being here and giving of our time in this way. All of us, I really like that. So, I read 6 environmental science textbooks this summer in anticipation of purchasing a set for the 2020-2021 academic year. Buying textbooks for a course is kind of like shopping for a car. You're going to spend a lot of money, and you're going to have to live with your choices for like 10 years, and so you need to be careful. 6 books, that's about 5,000 pages, but I didn't read every word of every book. Nobody does that. Nobody has ever read every word of any textbook, ever. Textbooks are designed to be unreadably large, promising unending wisdom, unequaled charisma, and perfect adherence to the standards, or whatever mission brings you to the sampled copy that you're holding in your hand. None of these things are my mission, but I will get to that presently. So I looked at 6 textbooks. Honestly, a few of them got more than a glance, 5-10 minutes, thank you, next. It's easier than you might think to reject an 800-page book in 5 minutes. Textbooks are products, and like many products out there, some are designed well, and some just have no unifying principle, or just plain, if I may, crappy. And it shows right away. Here, I brought a visual aid. I'll pass one around. I'll give you one to pass around in case people can't see it well. Here's something from one that didn't make the cut. Would you do me a giant favor? Just thank you. This is one of the losers. I've covered any identifying information to protect the publisher from this muckraking, but anyway, here under the tools of environmental science section, we can see somebody who's apparently an environmental scientist dressed in a heat-resistant fire suit standing next to a volcano, learning about the environment, one would assume. I don't really need a book that thinks it has to sex up the environment for us to make it interesting. Although, at least we can see that Greta is probably right. The world is on fire. Where was I? Excuse me. Anyway, I do not need students to identify environmental science as interesting or as a possible career, or to think environmental science can satisfy their thrill-seeking needs. If that happens, I'm glad, but it won't be because of the textbook. So then, what is my mission? Honestly, my mission is compassion. Environmental science is compassion. Climate is compassion. The Charter for Compassion itself gives us guidelines for why environmental science is important and for why climate is important as follows. The vision and mission of the environmental section of the Charter for Compassion speaks to the responsibility that we have to be stewards of our planet and the actions we undertake to guarantee justice for all living things. All living things. Not just Americans, not even just humans, as Patti Smith so sagely told us the last time we were all together here. Compassion for the rest of the world comes from awareness, and the awareness of the privileged position that most of us live in relative to the world. This builds compassion. Awareness that downwind or downriver from the plants that make our plastic products and our aluminum products and our electricity, there are people who get sick from these chemicals that are released. People of color, people in poverty, people in places you will never see. Because nobody sees the people that live in the shadows and plumes of refineries, petrochemical plants, or uranium mines. Awareness that dirty water, malnutrition, and indoor air pollution from fires and poorly vented kerosene stoves cause the premature death of over 20,000 children under the age of 5 every single day. And that figure is 25% better than it was 20 years ago. Awareness that, yes, humans are affected by climate, but what about plants and animals, for whom climate and unsustainable resource use are causing the extinction of species, as we often hear, at a rate 1,000 times greater than what would be normal. Awareness that, at least in New Zealand, all animals have been declared sentient beings, and that as a result, all animal testing has been banned based on the fact that they have essentially the same neurochemistry and neuroanatomy as us, minus the cortex, and in all likelihood have very similar feelings and experiences to what we have. Awareness that in many parts of the world, compassion is building, not just fear, self-loathing, conflict, and nihilism. A movement is growing, and we are it. Awareness, compassion. It's important to become aware of the world and its suffering, and to not look away. There are meaningful moments in teaching. Some of them are individual, and of course I celebrate those, but then there are meaningful group moments. Moments when you can see that a whole class has never thought of the world in the way that you've shown them. Every meaningful group moment that I've had in education has involved helping students to understand not only their part in the world around them, but the part of others who suffer while we take 30-minute showers, drive on our engineered highways in climate-controlled comfort, absorbed in our phones, and full to the brim with factory-produced food. I've seen the look in the eyes of privileged Americans as they learn of people in the world and in their own town who pay for the cost of the lifestyle we all share. You can see them change as their world becomes less about themselves, and for one uncomfortable moment, and hopefully more to follow, they have to grapple with poverty caused by lack of resources, or even worse, poverty that occurs amidst plentiful resources, with suffering, with environmental racism, with habitat destruction, and the suffering of innocent beings. Any environmental science book that does not acknowledge our common peril, our common humanity, and our commonality with the world of all living things is just a guy in a heat suit standing next to a volcano. Any book I choose starts by acknowledging that sustainability is the goal, the only goal, and not an option. I want a book that shouts to me that our economic systems are straining and destroying the natural capital that the world runs on. That poverty and unsustainable resource use and the current climate emergency are all tied together in one giant knot. Any book I choose will not just talk about how some countries are in poverty and the rest of them have to sort of have a responsibility to do better. The book I choose will tell my students that generational poverty, both within our country and around the world, is built into the economic system we have now. That unsustainable resource use, habitat destruction, and rampant climate change are both the cause and the inevitable result of this system and the problems that we have. The goal of environmental education for me is to bring students into the world of compassion. Compassion for not only every human, but every sentient being, by bursting the bubble of American complacency where a new car every 3 years, a few trips to Disney World, and a 30-year mortgage are what passes as a parameter of success. I call bullshit on that. For me, that is compassion. Compassion in this way is not open arms or beneficent syrupy smiles or kumbaya. Compassion is being astounded by the injustices perpetrated for our convenience. Astounded by the fact, for example, that gas costs only $3 per gallon to deliver to your car's tank, regardless of the other $9 per gallon in health, habitat, and climate costs that come with it. For me, compassion is understanding that poverty in other nations is not a matter of, quote, those people who are somehow not like us needing to learn to use condoms, for example. In my environmental science class, we learned that the world is made better by fixing the climate, by restoring the forests, by cleaning the water, by allowing the fisheries to regenerate. In my class, we learned that we solve population growth by educating girls and women around the world and giving them opportunities to support themselves and their families and control their own reproductive fate, promoting population control through opportunity and not by mandate. I will end by saying that it's hard to talk to a room of strong players like all of you about the beginning of that path. The place where so many of my students start. You are much farther along than they are. Many in this room were across the street at Center Congregational Church 2 years ago when to hear activist, deep ecologist, and spiritual teacher Joanna Macy. We took comfort in her message that our rage, our grief, our despair, our compassion fatigue are part of the regenerative process and not to turn away. You are the all-stars, the varsity players for the big game we're now in. Your hearts are open, compassion is beginning to take hold. You are the starting lineup, and Joanna and Greta are the Super Bowl coaches of climate activism and compassion. I'm just the JV, bringing new people to the back of the line to learn, to begin the process. But I know that you will help them along and show them the way with me. I'm no Joanna Macy, and I will not pretend to be. I'm intemperate and not patient, and all around not at the level that she's at with her practice. But if my job in my small room can open some hearts and minds to the suffering and hope of the world, and I can start sending them to support you, then I will have done as much as a science teacher can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We have time for one short question for Mike before we move on to Lisa.
Were you successful in finding a textbook that met your criteria?
I was. I can say what it's called, I suppose, since it's a good report. It's called Living in the Environment by Miller and Spoolman. Fantastic book. And actually, if I may,
I spent all summer reading this, and on the first day of school I came back and spoke to my department chair, the inimitable and wonderful Michelle Hood, if any of you know her, and I said that my favorite was Miller, and she finished, and Spoolman? And I felt like the smartest kid in class, let me tell you what, because that was her favorite too. Thanks for the question.
Lisa?
Yeah. I'm actually going to start by sharing who I am. I've been living in Brattleboro for about 13 years, and I am a parent, and I'm an adoptive parent, and my interest in compassion started as part of my parenting journey, as I've learned about helping people from a young age with developmental trauma, and how a essential key ingredient of that is finding compassion for the people that you're with, regardless of their behavior or their experiences or what they might be saying to you in the moment. And that has led me to think a lot about community and how we all work together, hopefully, ideally, as a community to succeed. Because as I've experienced, at least in my own family, something like somebody who's struggling with trauma can affect every single person around them, and it ripples out around you in bigger and bigger and bigger ways. And I feel that that is an example in my own life of how we as a society are dealing with something as catastrophic as climate change. It is traumatic for all of us, and it will become more and more so if we're not able to affect change right away. And that is a really, really big emotional thing to deal with as we think about these big problems, these big issues, and still try to work together as a community and figure out how we're going to go about getting ourselves on the right track. So that's kind of where my interest lies in this discussion, especially. But I will tell you the question. I'd love to talk a little bit about the second question also. Brattleboro is a small part of the world. And that's something that the question interested me because it's something that I struggle with. I always want to make really big splashes, and it's hard to be small sometimes. And I have been learning to accept that sometimes a small step is the most necessary, important first step of any bigger action. And I've been able to witness that in Brattleboro, for example, where we might do something small as a community, as a small town, and then that has a ripple effect. And it might seem like nothing, but over time, each of these ripples continue to create new ripples, and they all keep going out into the world, hopefully motivating and inspiring others. So one tiny example that made me feel great was we have been doing some critical mass bike rides here in Brattleboro, and then I recently discovered they started doing them in Burlington, and they're starting to do them around the state, which is really, really exciting. And if we had just sat at home and said, oh, I'm just one person, or I'm just one family, or I'm just this one tiny town of Brattleboro, we wouldn't have gotten to make that first step that then created a ripple. And who knows, you may not even ever fully realize where all of the little ripples end up as they get bigger throughout our society. And so that's something that I've been working on, accepting and loving more and more as I get older, is loving the small things and accepting them as a necessary and very important part of those big splashes. The third question as well, I was very interested in, because the question is, are our current considerations of climate change improperly human-centric? And I thought about that a lot, and I really believe that because an essential part of surviving this period in history, an essential part of surviving as a species is understanding our interconnectedness and understanding how all of the living things on Earth are connected and are part of all of the other things that are alive on Earth. That is such a central, important ingredient of surviving as a species and continuing on in whatever fashion we're able to continue on. I feel like in a big way, it actually is somewhat human-centric to also understand and accept the interconnectedness of it all. Partly because of obviously all species want to survive. That's our goal, right? That's a natural part of the world when you are living on Earth as a species. You want to continue, you want to survive. But also as individuals, we humans love to think about our own desires and needs and triumphs. And in a grand sense, all of those things are actually connected. Our sense of our individualness is connected to our sense as a species, which is connected to the greater world, which is an essential part of our survival. And so I don't really see that there is any other way. I don't see that there is necessarily anything wrong with being a little bit self-centered in this regard, because essentially, in order to be self-centered, you do have to really think about everybody else. If you're going to be thinking about the big picture, and you want to continue in your own triumphs and individual hopes and dreams, we have to do it all together as a society, as a group. And those are my thoughts on those questions. Is there any questions from you?
Would somebody like the mic to ask this a question?
Not so much have a question, but feedback, and I wanted to say how much I appreciated hearing about the little things and the little steps and how they add up and they ripple out and can make a big difference.
Hi, so my name is Django Desi. I just want to start by saying I am taking your class when I go to BUHS, no matter what.
It'd be an honor.
All right, it'll be an honor working with you. So I am going to address the first question. Climate change is putting many people in the world under stress, physically, culturally, and emotionally. As we go through this, what are the opportunities to grow in our compassion, and what are the challenges these changes will put on our compassion? So, when I think to myself about climate change has been a reality to me since I was like maybe in first grade or something. Around that time. And I used to think that, like, okay, what if a genie came to me and was like, all right, Django, you have one wish, and I would be like, bam, stop climate change, like right now, like that's my one wish. And that was always like my idea. I was like, okay, if a genie ever like comes out of my like lampshade or whatever, I'm going to say stop climate change. And that was like my plan. But like as I've been going through this and as I've been working more with this whole climate crisis and starting to see this bigger picture that this is more than a genie in a bottle, I think I would think twice about saying stop climate change like that, because it's bringing us together, is what I've noticed. No longer are there, I'm starting to see these gaps close between like the really wealthy and the really the big money holders and those who are trodden down on and those who are below. And I'm starting to see these gaps close, and I'm starting to see people come together and say, all right, we need to unite about this, and we need to stand together. And that's such a beautiful thing to me, is to see that. At first, I just felt this despair inside of me, and I was like, oh man, like, am I like the only one who cares about this? Like, my fellow second graders don't even know what this is. But like, now as this movement is starting to move, I'm seeing this like revolution take place that is amazing. And for me right now, it's more than just stopping climate change. It's uniting like everyone in the world. And that's so beautiful to me, and I don't think I would exchange that for anything. So to go back to the genie, I think I would think twice now about saying to the genie, so yeah, stop climate change. I don't know, I'd probably wish for like, I don't know, unimportant, but we're not gonna go there. But I am noticing too that as we unite, climate change really has a lot of different effects on people. There's a couple of different ways that people are coping with climate change. There's coping with the reality of climate change, and the first one is obviously doing something about it and getting motivated by it. And at first, when I discovered what this was, it really deeply hurt me, and I guess I got a little depressed. I was in like 3rd grade, and it was just really sad to me, and I just kind of got into this cycle in my head, like, okay, I'm not seeing anybody do anything. I keep hearing these like terrible facts from National Geographic, and like it's just not going anywhere, and this was really sad to me, and this like really hurt me. But as Greta Thunberg kind of opened it up for me, I guess. I mean, I thought about like building little machines and stuff. I thought about solutions, but then Greta Thunberg came, and the first walkout I did for the climate was on March 15th this year, and as soon as I did something, I felt so much better about it. And I think it's the notion that once you can see the problem and you can be hurt by the problem, once you start doing something about it, it immediately feels so much better. So anybody out there who is hurting because of climate change needs to take some kind of action, whether that means for you planting a tree or reading an article that you've been scared to read because you know there's going to be some scary facts in there, or if it means striking on the street or pretending to be dead in the road. Just any kind of action really helps. And I found that once that I stepped onto the street and I was with other youth and other people, and this compassion that I felt for everybody else that was on the street with me was something that I've never felt before. And especially on September 20th, like recently, I just kind of felt like everybody, we were all like one. We were all like this one massive blob, I don't know, that was coming up Main Street, and it was just so powerful. And I just felt like I was one with everybody, and that is really, like, that's how I deal with climate change, is through compassion, standing with other people and doing something. And now, it used to be that when I heard a terrible fact that it just scared me and I got sad because of it. But I've come to this place now where I hear a kind of fact and I hear about somebody who's denying it, or somebody or something like, I don't know, this species just went extinct. And instead of making me really sad, now that just motivates me. Like it makes me angry, and I take that inside myself and I'm like, all right, this is why I'm fighting. This is why I'm pushing. And so that's how I deal with it. But then there are other ways that people see climate change, and and how they deal with it. Then there's the people that know it's a reality and hide from it and don't deal with it and push it away and stand there on the street and pretend they don't see us with signs. I call that like this. I think that's about 70% of the population, my estimation, that just that know it's a reality, and I mean, think that climate change is bad and that we need to stop it, but aren't actively doing anything. But really, when we look at those people, I think that a lot of them are scared. And instead of saying to those people, wow, why don't you stand with us? Like, what's wrong with you? We have to look. We have to step in their shoes and realize that that's how they're dealing with it. Is they're scared, so they can't do anything yet. And so, how do we empower those people, and how do we get them to step up there? Well, there's one way to do it is to shake them out of their boots, like die in the street, and like make them see something. Another way is just to talk to them. I have a lot of friends who realize climate change is a thing, and they just I don't know how somehow it came up in conversation with one of my friends, and I realized that he was really scared by it, and the reason he wasn't doing anything was because he was so scared, and he took it within himself, and he just kind of like let it sit there, and just kind of like was like, I don't know, like rotting there or something. And that was his way of dealing with it, and I don't think that's very healthy, but I couldn't make any choices for him, so I just said, well, dude, if you need anything, and if you ever want to strike with me on the street, I'll be Plenty Park, come and hold up a cardboard sign. So then, yeah, there's the 70%, and then another way of dealing with it is saying, okay, I know I see those facts, but I'm going to deny them. I'm going to push them away. I'm going to say it's fake news, and I'm going to just, I don't like that, so I'm going to say it's fake, and I'm going to make fun of all the people on the street, and I'm going to say, you ego freaks, what are you doing? And I get that a lot. And like, but when instead of looking at those people that are like laughing at us and that are yelling scary things at us, when I was doing the dying, I was lying on the street and I had my eyes closed and I was wearing sunglasses. There was these two people behind me, and I started listening to them, and some of the stuff that they were saying was like scary. Like I felt threatened. They were like, tie them to the cows and drag them away, and it got to the point where I was like, they were yelling to the police, like, arrest them, arrest their parents, tear gas them, like pepper spray them, run them over with the tractors. And I got to this point where I was like, geez, am I doing the right thing right now? I mean, are these people right? Like, should they be doing this? And then I kind of put myself in their shoes. And I kind of looked at myself on the street there, and I was like, oh, okay, I can see what they're going through right now. They are scared AF. Like, they're seeing this problem, and they're seeing these kids deal with it, and they're like, oh, I don't want that. Like, put that away. I just want to keep watching this parade go by. I just want to keep it the way it is. And their response to action and seeing such a drastic thing in front of them is to say, oh, that's nasty, I hate that. Now let's do something really negative about it. So one of the best ways to, one, destabilize that argument, and two, get those people, I'm not going to say on your side, but have them agree with you, or at least come to some kind of midpoint, is to put yourself in their shoes and have compassion for them, and realize that they're also going through this, and this is just the way they're going through it. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Does anybody have a question for Django?
Just that you point out that you wrote an excellent letter to the editor, I think it was a Reformer, about your experience with signs after one of the climate strikes, and where you wrote about the 70% that know climate change is happening, but they couldn't look you in the eye. It was a really wonderful piece, and anybody wants to check it out. I think Django wrote just a stunning piece on that.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Abby Mnookin, and as Jess mentioned in the introduction, I am a staff member with 350 Vermont, and we also have a local chapter here in Brattleboro called 350 Brattleboro, and we are connected to the global climate organization called 350.org. And I also am the coordinator of the project called Mother Up, which is bringing parents and families into the climate movement. I'm also a parent, and that will come into play. Hopefully I'm not dodging the question by saying that I feel like I may try to touch on all of them, so I'm not sure that I will pick one individual one, although I will start with number one, which is that climate change is putting many people in the world under stress, physically, culturally, and emotionally. As we go through this, what are the opportunities to grow in our compassion, and what are the challenges these changes will put on our compassion? So I have been working with 350 Vermont for about 4 years, and I came to them kind of circuitously. I actually was a high school biology teacher in a former life, but I bring that with me. And I studied environmental science in college and graduate school, but really felt called to dedicate more of my time and energy to activism and organizing, specifically when I became a parent, although that had been a part of my life, like Django, for most of my time. I want to get a story of like first grade, like you have. So one of the things that really draws me to 350 as an organization is that it's distancing itself more from the conversation as an environmental conversation, and it's moving it more or leaning more in the direction of justice. And those two things don't need to be separated, and they really aren't. But for a long time, the environmental movement really talked about the environment, and people were separate from that. And the conversation was about protecting air and water and soil and land, all of which are really important and I believe deserve protection. And in New Zealand, I believe in other places, rivers have rights as people do. So that's hugely important, and it comes up to number 3 as well. But in centering justice, there's an acknowledgement that climate change affects all life on Earth. All life on Earth. But it doesn't affect all life on Earth equally. And that's true for people, and that's true for other species as well. But in that acknowledgement, there must be compassion at the center of that conversation, especially for those of us, myself included, who come with a tremendous amount of privilege. And acknowledging that there are billions of people in the world suffering far worse than I, as a direct result of changes in the climate. And that billions of people and species are at risk of, their survival is at risk. And while that's true for everyone, and I don't believe that we can escape climate change, we can't buy our way out of it, however much some politicians and economic leaders want us to believe that, we can't buy our way out of it, but having money does help. And so it's not affecting people equally. And so that's really at the center of the conversation that I feel like we need to be having as a community when we're talking about climate and who's being affected the most. And so those populations include some that Mike Auerbach talked about in terms of where is the fossil fuel infrastructure, where are the refineries, where are the incinerators and the landfills and all of those are put in poorer communities, predominantly communities of color. But also we need to be, I just lost my train of thought. So centering those conversations and making sure that people, that justice is at the center of whatever actions we're taking on climate is really important, and that's drawn me to the work of 350 Vermont. But then also connected to that human-centric piece, and I think many of us might have been in the room when Sherry Mitchell spoke at the library here in Brattleboro several years ago. She is of Penobscot and Wabanaki descent. She lives in Maine but travels all over and has written a book called Sacred Instructions that I highly recommend. And one of the things that she talks about is the myth of disconnection and how just the belief that we are separate from anything, from all life on earth, from each other, from the environment, that is a really destructive myth. And that myth of disconnection is also really central to this conversation. And so one of the things that we as individuals can do in this work, in this climate movement, and many have said this, is to stop thinking of ourselves as individuals and to think of ourselves as interconnected parts of this web of life, and acting in community, acting as a collective, acting as if our decisions affect others as they do, but not acting in isolation as one. And so that has also been really influential in my work. And this past summer I attended Healing Turtle Island, which is a 4-day retreat. Jess and some of her family was also there, and maybe others in the room. And I hope to return, but a lot of that also focused on connection and making these connections within ourselves and with each other, and also healing. It's focusing on healing the wounds of Turtle Island, going back to colonization and the first, really some of those first interactions with colonial settlers. And it's the Healing Turtle Island is going to move all around, but it started near the first location of contact between indigenous people and colonial settlers. So there's a lot of power in that place, Nabuzin. And I also want to touch on another really impactful writer and speaker that was mentioned, Joanna Macy, who is also here in Brattleboro. We're so lucky to have all these people visit Brattleboro, which also comes back to number 2, which is we're this small part of the world, and yet we are also, we are the world, all of it. But Joanna Macy has a book called Active Hope that she also often talks about. I think that might have been the focus of her talk. But just this idea that hope is not something that we just have and sit with. I hope a genie comes, which is such a beautiful thing. I hope that genie comes. I really do. Maybe that's us. But I think as Django spoke to, and as his evolution as an activist and an organizer, is that taking action is actually what fuels that hope, or refuels that hope, and refills that well. And so it's very easy to fall into despair, and I think Dave will probably speak to this as a mental health clinician, but some serious shit we are up against. And it's not just climate, right? It's like colonization, white supremacy, capitalism, swimming in the sea of all oppressions. These are big issues that we're up against, and climate is maybe amidst all of that. And I'm a parent of 2 young children, and I want to believe that there is a future for them that's bright. And the only way that that is possible for me is to take action. And that's one of the ways that my hope survives or thrives. And I think I'll end with this, the hummingbird story that many of you are probably familiar with. And it was just played at the museum when we were there for Write for Climate a few weeks ago. If any of you want to gather on Friday mornings from 9 to 11 and talk and write for climate, Lissa and Emma and Amber and others will be there. Hooker Dunham Alley, either patio coffee or a little gallery in there. You can find us on Word House. So, when we were at the museum, I was reminded of the hummingbird story that Wangari Maathai spoke in this very short, like 2-minute clip, and you can find it if you want to search on YouTube. I probably won't do it justice, but the idea is that there is a raging forest fire, and it is big, and the forest is burning, and all life in the forest is threatened. And while this is happening, a hummingbird is visiting the river and getting some water in its beak and returning to the forest and dropping the water from its beak onto the fires. And all of the larger animals in the forest are paralyzed with fear and mocking the hummingbird, because we have large tigers and elephants and, big animals that could do much more than this tiny hummingbird. And they're all saying, "What on earth are you doing? This is a forest fire. You're a tiny hummingbird. You're doing nothing." And this, also kind of touches back on this, like, we're just Brattleboro. But the hummingbird says, "This is my home, and it's on fire. And I'm a hummingbird, and this is all I can do. But I'm not going to sit around and watch my home burn. I'm going to do what I can, drop by drop, bit by bit, and try my best." And that's what I'm hoping to do, what I try to do as a parent and as an organizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Does anybody have a question for Abby?
Explain what the organization is, 350.
Sure.
And what do you do?
Yeah, and I did bring some literature, but I didn't want to paper it everywhere. But I do have, in case anyone's interested, a few brochures. But 350 Vermont, well, just a little background. 350 gets its name because 350 parts per million is the safe, the highest safe level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, where life on Earth can continue as we know it. We are now above 400 parts per million, or above 410 parts per million, so we've actually already surpassed what is considered the safe level. So the challenge now is actually to draw down, some of you have read that book, another really great resource, to draw down that level back to 350 parts per million. For most of human history, it was actually at 280 parts per million or lower, but 350 is considered still okay, so we want to get back to that. So that's where the organization gets its name, and it was founded about 10 years ago by a group of Middlebury College students and Bill McKibben. So Vermont, again, a small place on the map, but it's started, well, I don't want to say started, but it has helped to grow this global grassroots climate movement. And so there are chapters in most states and lots of countries around the world, and each one is connected to 350.org and also somewhat of its own thing. So they depend, we are financially separate and make some decisions about what we want to focus on in Vermont that may be different from other areas of the country or the world. But we're also connected to big global movements and uprisings like just this past September 20th, which was a global climate strike that lots of organizations signed on for, with a lot of inspiration from Greta Thunberg and many other youth organizers and indigenous activists. So we take part in both global and then local issues. And in 350 Brattleboro as well, sometimes we'll do what the state is doing, and sometimes we'll do our own thing, like help with plastic bag bans, or hopefully that answered. And I can give you information about how to connect with us.
Thank you, Abby. Dave?
Hey there. My name's Dave Cohen. I'm a dad, and I'm a psychotherapist in town. Also very active with 350 Brattleboro with Abby. And also started something called V-Bike, which is a program to really kind of rethink the bike in Vermont. We call it rebooting the bike. If you've been seeing people with cargo bikes carrying their kids around, or folks riding up hills, you just like, how are you doing that? It has something to do with some design and technology that we're bringing to Vermont. Actually, I have a state contract to provide consultations for Vermonters around how to get to this next level of mobility solutions that really brings us back into the world in a way that connects us and bonds us with our social and ecological fabric that we are joined into. I was just thinking, what am I going to answer? Like, I have a little bit of 1, I have 2-ish, and 3, a little 4-ish, and 5. So I'm going to just riff on that. The first thing that came to my mind was I was thinking about compassion and really how you can have compassion for a person that maybe thinks radically different from your point of view and your mindset. And the first story that I was thinking about is my grandmother. There was I think I was in 4th grade or something like that. I went to summer camp, and I came back, after going on this camping trip. It might have been 2 days, but it was a magical trip for me because I grew up in New York City, and we didn't have that much of an opportunity to get out into the woods and to natural areas. And I was so excited and camping, and I saw all kinds of animals, and I was so excited. And I told my grandmother about this experience. I was so happy about Grandma, I went out and I camped and I backpacked, and she looked at me and she said, "What, you slept in the filth and the dirt with the animals, and how could you?" And at that point I was like, what? I just realized that somebody can have such a vastly different point of view from their experience and their tradition and whatever. It kind of shocked me. And so I'm always reminded of that story whenever somebody is like, what the heck are you doing? You're riding bikes? You should be in a car. I realize that people have a vastly different experience, through their upbringing, through their culture. So I'm always trying to, because I love my grandmother. She made the best kugel in the world, and she could make me do whatever she wanted by offering me a little food. As a psychotherapist, I really think about the structure of who we are. And this goes along with some of the work that I do with V-Bike as well. Essentially, we are sensory beings. Right now, we are sensing this room. We're hearing, we're feeling our own bodies. We actually experience our own internal bodies. Interoception is a form of, knowing what we're feeling inside. Proprioception is how our body is positioned. And then we've got all these other senses. And so at a very fundamental, rudimentary kind of analysis, we are sensory beings. We sense the world. We also have bodies, and our bodies then, feel that. We can, of course, through the sense of touch. And we also have emotions. So our senses and our emotions go together. We really can't have a highly emotional kind of connection to something we can't sense at all if we don't know what's going on. So, there's something about we are sensory beings. We develop emotional ties to things. And throughout most of human existence, there has been this realization that not only are we sensing the world, but other creatures are sensing us. In fact, other plants and animals are possibly sensing us. There's a reciprocity in the world that largely goes unseen in our industrial culture. And I was just at the Day of Indigenous Peoples event at the Retreat Farm, and Chief Roger of the Abenaki tribe was talking a lot about this sense of I think Abby was getting this, and others have talked about this, is the sense that we're porous to the world, that we are, we're so limited in this body, especially in this culture where we think we're separate from everything else. And they were really talking about this amazing reciprocity that goes on between them and the world, whether it's the elements and the animals, the plants, and so forth. And so there's been a redefinition of that in industrial culture. We've been taught that we're actually separate beings, that we have our own, no doubt we have our own internal feelings and all that, but we've actually become fragmented from the natural world so much that I think a lot of people sense a feeling of emptiness because we no longer feel those connections. That is perfect for something called consumerism, because if we're not feeling really connected to much of anything, we're going to have to connect to something, right? And so the industrial kind of worldview, which God knows, we don't, we know it's run throughout history for hundreds of years. A lot of people like to blame it on Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am," which indicates that only our thoughts and what we think is important. Everything else is not important. In fact, he maybe even separated the human mind from not only the body, but the entire existence of this planet and everything around us. So we're kind of mired in this, fragmented place, this way of thinking of ourselves as just individuals that are disconnected from a larger reciprocity with the world. And that sets us up for the stage of, consumerism, and what we sometimes call the empty self. And so then, my sense is a lot of us are feeling like a chronic loss, as opposed to say a indigenous population that has just been removed from their land. They have an acute sense of loss. There's an acute loss of their relational position with the land. With us, we have some ties to this land. We've got names for some of the mountains, but we don't have that deep kind of mythical, very deep textural, contextual relationship with the world. So we're kind of living in a chronic state, and I'm starting to see a lot of clients that are coming to me who say, "No, I practice something called eco-psychology." Nice new fancy word for ancient ideas. I think it was Emerson who said, "The ancients stole my best ideas." And that's what eco-psychology is. It's just we need to reconnect. We need to find that place of reciprocity, that reconnection with the world, and nature as healer can actually help us in tremendous ways. Of course, there have been all these studies now done that people go out in the woods and they put them through a psychological battery of tests, and they go, nature is good. Well, we kind of do that for a long time. How it kind of helps to calm our nervous systems, being in, not so much, I don't even like to call it nature, but a lot of people refer to the more than human world as a place where we can bond. And my study of of Hebrew texts, because I was doing a lot of study, I was actually thinking about becoming a rabbi for a while. And one of the most stunning things I found is the word for wilderness is midbar. So if you ever read the Torah, you'll come to the section of midbar. It's a wilderness, but it also means a place that speaks. It means to speak. This is the place that speaks to us, where we become more full and whole, and we actually learn who we are. So, it's hidden in a lot of languages, these cues to our reciprocity with the world. So part of my kind of work is, with clients that are dealing with a lack of hope, a sense of like there's really like it's like we're in some kind of game right now and it's about to end, in like a minute, and we have a minute to save the world. There's a real kind of stress that's going on with us. And then also people that are not even thinking about it so much. There's this thing called post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. But there's a psychologist in Washington, D.C. who's proposed pre-traumatic stress syndrome. That's like, we know it's coming. For some people that have already experienced, we know in Vermont with Irene, people have experienced that trauma of land, almost dissolving beneath their feet. For a lot of us, it's like we know it's coming, we can sense it. And so this is like a PTSD-2 that she invented, which is, that's another kind of aspect, I think, of the chronic element of what a lot of us are facing. So working with clients that come in, and I've had a lot of young clients coming in that are, in despair, and I can share that with them. I'm also, in despair. There are times when I'm really like, yeah, this is really bad. There's a lot of reason to feel bad, especially with the current, political scene that we have. But I also fall back on some, sometimes my Jewish kind of background, my grandmother, and also just some of the kind of wisdom of from the Talmudic tradition. And one of the really important parts of the Talmud is like, it is not upon us to finish the work, neither are we free to desist from it. And that's so much about like, we're not going to finish the work. We don't even know what finishing the work looks like. But we're here to do the work. And I think that's such an important message. And, I actually have a quote that I just want to share before I put down the microphone. It's from Rebecca Solnit, just around hope. And I have just a little thing from Martin Luther King. But she said, hope is not like a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it'll take everything you have to steer the future away from endless wars and annihilating the earth's treasures. Hope just means another world might be possible, not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. The last thing I'll just say is that some of the work that I do with clients has to do with Martin Luther King's work around, he had this like wild dream of forming a society of the maladjusted. He made this great speech about like, psychology is telling us today we need to be adjusted individuals and adjust to the situation we're in. He was like, no way. I'm maladjusted. I'll tell you what I'm maladjusted about, war, racism, poverty. And it's a really important thing for a lot of people to know that some of the feelings that we have that are really uncomfortable, maybe even sad, are really natural reactions to the situation we're in. And yet, finally, I'll just end with a quote from Václav Havel, hope is not prognostication. It's not like, oh my God, we know 30% of the bird species have disappeared since like, it's 1970. 30% of the bird population. But hope is not prognostication. Hope is an orientation of the spirit.
Thank you, Dave. Is there any questions? Yeah.
Django said something very thought-provoking, which is many believe that climate change is bad, but aren't doing anything about it, which leads to a thought that Jessy and I have been wrestling over. There was a survey carried out in this country which found that a large majority of Americans believe that action is necessary concerning climate change. But then when the same respondents were asked, are you willing to pay a small tax to help it happen? The percentage was much smaller. Are you willing to give up meat, to reduce driving, to reduce plane travel? The percentage was much smaller. What do we think about that, and what are we going to do about it?
Well, that is, that's one way to look. That's negative sacrifice. That's saying that you're giving up something that you like. You're giving up something good. That's good for your life. That's negative sacrifice. Okay, that's one way to deal with it, is that we say that, okay, we're going to give up these things. We're going to take this out of my life and give it for the greater good. Another way to look at it is that there's also positive sacrifice. There's also saying, all right, instead of putting my money into fossil fuels, I'm going to put it into green energy. I can't think of a lot more examples right now, but like...
I have a beautiful example.
Go ahead.
So I love to get in the car and go on a road trip, and I have flown a few times in my life to exotic places, and the last few years when I've said to my family, so where do you want to go this summer? And I'm thinking, we'll get in the car, and we'll go to Maine, and we'll go camping or something. And my husband says, I know. Let's go in the backyard. And we're like, okay. Now, fortunately, our backyard is beautiful. Black Mountain is in our backyard. So we just like pack up our bags and head up into the mountain and come back 3 days later completely, utterly blissed out. Another time we got on our bicycles and we went on this mega bike trip all the way to Westminster West. And we decided we would do it on roads that have no cars on them anymore. So we just spent a couple of days exploring what used to be human inhabited Vermont. Old cellar holes, forgotten cemeteries, just imagining the villages that were there and the people that shared Sunday dinners together as we meandered under the canopy of maple, oak, beech. It was beautiful. So anyway, someone could say we were sacrificing, but no way. It was beautiful.
I think we're all saying the same, a similar thing in that there is so much to be gained, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing that our culture promotes necessarily all the time. And that would be wonderful if that changed. We need to get some sort of a glossy Disney-esque promotional campaign for the beautiful, amazing benefits that could be gained from these so-called sacrifices. But in the meantime, we can just, speak about them to our friends and our neighbors and get really excited about all of the possibilities.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I also think it's a good reminder in those moments when we have these questions and when we're thinking about the answers. And I have to remind myself of this too, is that survey was set up to pit us against each other as individuals and consumers. And so it's almost like, throw that survey out the window. We need a whole new survey. We need a whole new way of thinking about it. And we need to be looking at the top 100 corporations that are throwing our planet in the garbage, and how are they dealing with it? What sacrifices do they need to be making? And how can we pressure that to happen? The military complex, the U.S. military is one of the top polluters in the entire world, more than a lot of countries. So I do really believe that individual choices matter, and I try to make choices that put me in right relationship with the earth. There are still more things I could do, for sure. And that can't be the solution, or it can't be the only solution.
Just a thought around redefinition of, our selfhood, around being a consumer. So as part of that whole redefinition, as we've, we hear on the radio all the time that we're just consumers. And that's a real kind of profoundly impoverished way of thinking about a human being. But we're told that all the time. Oh my God. The one thing I mention is like the work I do with V-Bike. It's one of those things where a lot of people don't want to, give up this thing we call the car, or the automobile, which means automatic mobility, where we're granted this massive, almost unlimited power by fossil fuel corporations and automobile corporations. And that's, it colonizes our sense of, who we are and what our body is like in the world and our relationship to the world. But with V-Bike, the whole work is working with the ground up, working with individuals to, with something we call car reduction therapy. And the people are doing it, and it's gradually building up, working with the people that are ready to really take this on and bring their body senses and their our kind of inheritance of this great emotional connection we have to the world back to our communities, back to the social environment, back to the ecological world to be inhabited, and it is happening. So there are a lot of people that won't give, so-called give things up. With V-Bike, people feel like, and I'm constantly getting emails that I just can't be in the car anymore. I got to bring my kids around on a bike, and boy, that is music to my ears, and it's working.
I guess I feel like I have to round it out after all these choices, but I've always been sort of the Al Gore position ever since. Well, Al Gore rides around on an airplane in limousines and eats big meals and then talks about climate, and I said, well, that's good enough for Al Gore. That's because what he's doing is important, and I always put myself in that position because I'm, changing the youth, blah, 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 and so, but when I finally heard Greta, and I walked out of my school, and I went down to the park, and I heard Django speak so powerfully, and Abby, just everything he did to make that happen, Dave, I'm sure. And I was moved, and I didn't give anything up as a sacrifice per se, but I felt like I had to be part of the change, that I had to honor the pain and the grief that you felt since you were so young, and I have to realize that that's their whole lives, and having been part of that problem my whole life, this is really true. I left you might notice, I call this the house that Burger King built, but I left the park, and this is really true. I went to McDonald's, and I got the last quarter pounder I will ever have. I have not, and no, really don't, because it's nothing compared to what everybody's doing. I'm just saying that I was moved to change something in my life that was meaningful, and believe me, I have not eaten any fast food or industrial meat or anything like that. I haven't given up meat. I'm not a vegan. I'm not, so like, I'm not asking for applause, but I'm just saying it meant something had to mean something coming out of that. And I guess I'm inspired by David to finish my little statement here by quoting Rabbi Hillel to say, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when?
What a beautiful ending. But not a total ending, because we have 30 minutes for compassionate communication work. So let's give our panelists a huge round of applause.